Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to take our Node.js Express app to the next level by adding secure user authentication and authorization using JWTs or JSON Web Tokens. We'll go over how to set up user registration, login, and protected routes based on user roles like admin or regular user. By the end of this video, you'll have a fully functional authentication system integrated in your app. Let's jump right into it. To get started, let's install the packages we'll need for authentication. We'll use JSON Web Tokens to sign and verify the JWTs and bcrypt for hashing user passwords. We'll also need to install the type definitions for these packages. We'll start by defining a simple user model. In this example, we'll just use an in-memory array to store the users. But in a real application, you'll likely be using a database like MongoDB or Postgres. Next, we'll create utility functions to handle JWT generation and verification. This will help us issue tokens to users when they log in and verify them for protected routes. We've defined a new environment variable for the secret key, which ensures only the server can create or verify tokens, preventing unauthorized tampering or forgery. Think of it as a password that secures the JWT for authentication. We'll add a secret to our .env file and update the .env.example so developers know how to include it during setup. The first method, generateToken, creates a JWT that encodes the user's ID and role. This token is sent to the client and can be used to authenticate future requests. The token expires after 1 hour. The second method, verifyToken, verifies if the provided JWT is valid and hasn't been tampered with. If valid, it returns decoded information such as user ID and role. If the token is invalid, it logs an error and throws an exception. Now we need to set up two new routes. One is for user registration, so users can set up an account, and one for the user to log into the application. Firstly, create a file called authrouter.ts in the routes folder. You'll need to import the following dependencies and then call the router function to create a new router instance. Next, we need a utility function isUniqueUser. This will be used to make sure that when the user registers, the username and email address used are unique, so we do not get duplicate registrations. The first route we'll create is the register route, which takes the username, email, password, and role to create a new user. We have two server-side validators in place to make sure the correct parameters are passed to the route. Firstly, we'll check all the necessary parameters are there, and then we make use of the isUniqueUser utility function to make sure the user hasn't already been registered. The next step is to hash the user password using bcrypt, as for security purposes we don't want to store the password in its original form. We then take the hash password and the other parameters, auto-generate an ID and a created app property, and create a new user. This is then pushed into our users array, which simulates saving to a database. As mentioned before, this is only an in-memory store for the purpose of this demo. In reality, you'll want to connect this to a database so the created user can be persisted. Currently, the user array will be wiped every time you stop the application. The final lines in the register route is to give feedback by returning a 201 status and a JSON message, and also by using the logger to log out a success message. The next route is a login route. This takes the username and password and then checks if the user exists in the user array, and if the password is correct. If these checks fail, then the 400 status is returned to the user with some feedback, and we log out a message with the logger. If these checks pass, then we generate a token and return the token as JSON. The last part of the code is to export the router so it can be consumed by the app. Now we'll create middleware that verifies the JWT token on protected routes. This will ensure only authenticated users can access certain endpoints. Firstly, the middleware will pull the JWT token from the authorization header from the request object. If the token is missing, then the function will return a 401 unauthorized response, along with a message to provide feedback to the client. If a token does exist, then we move on to the try-catch block, where we will attempt to verify the token using the JWT utility method we created earlier. The valid token will return a decoded payload which contains the user ID and role. We then attach the token to the request object under the user property. This allows the user information to be accessed in subsequent middleware or routes. If the token was successfully verified and the user information was attached to the request, next is called. This passes control to the next middleware or route handler in the Express stack. If the token fails to verify, then an exception will be thrown and a 403 status will be returned as a response, along with a message. To take it a step further, we'll add role-based access control middleware. This will allow us to protect certain routes, so we have more granular control over who can access certain routes based on the role they are assigned. The middleware accepts a single argument role and returns a middleware function that checks if the authenticated user's role, which is stored in the user property in the request object after authentication, matches the required role. If the user's role doesn't match, a 403 forbidden response is returned denying access. If the user's role matches, the request proceeds to the next middleware or route handler. This middleware will be added after our authentication middleware on routes where we need to have role-based access control. Now we have our JWT and role-based middleware. Let's apply them to protect some routes. To do so, we'll create a new file, protectedrouter.ts, in our routes directory. We will then create a general protected route for logged in users and an admin-only route. For the profile route, we are defining a general protected route that requires the user to be authenticated via a valid JWT. The second argument of the get function, authenticate JWT, is our middleware for checking if the user is authenticated. If the user is authenticated, the request proceeds to the route handler. If not, access is denied. For the admin route, the route is protected by two middleware functions. Firstly, by authenticate JWT to ensure the user is authenticated, and secondly, by authorize role admin, which ensures the authenticated user has the admin role. Only users which pass both middleware may proceed. You can see how the two middleware interact with each other and support each other. Authenticate JWT must be before the authorized role, as it is the former that supplies the role in the request object for the latter to function. Okay, so now we have our utility functions, our auth routes, our middleware, and our protected routes. We still need to integrate this into our app. To do so, we will add our auth and protected routes into the index.ts file. First, import the new routers we have created, then call the express use method on the two routers. We need to add one additional middleware to this file, and that is the express.json middleware. This is used to pass incoming JSON requests, which is needed for our login and register routes that pass data from the client. Now, if we come to run the app, we will see import errors because we have created two new directories, utils and models, and used alias imports. However, we have not defined them in our tsconfig.json or our jest.config.js. To fix this, we'll add these new aliases to our config files. We'll also add it to our tsconfig.jest.json file to make it consistent. For more details about alias imports, you can check out the second video in the series. Another error you may encounter is a type error from adding the user property to the request object. Request is a type from the express package, whereas user is something custom we have added. We can fix this issue by adding our own type definition. Create a folder in the src folder called types, with a file called express.d.ts. Within express.d.ts, we will declare global namespace express and add an interface called request with a single optional property called user. This has the shape of the user payload interface we define in JWT.ts. This fixes the issue as our own defined request interface will be automatically merged with the request interface from the express package. In order for the compiler to work properly, there's one more step we have to take, and that is to add the types folder to our type definition in our tsconfig and tsconfig.jest.json files. This tells our Typescript compiler to look in these folders as well as node modules for type definitions. One last thing before we move on to testing is we need to move the call for dotenv.config in the index.ts file above the imports for the routers. This is as the environment variables are loaded in the JWT.ts utility file, which is used by the login route. If we load the environment variables after these imports, then the environment variable won't be accessible to these files. Next thing to do is to test all the endpoints to make sure it's working. We're going to do that by running some curl commands in the terminal. I'll include a supplement link in the video description so you can copy and paste the curl command. First, let's register a user with the role of user, followed by a user with a role of admin. If we try and register the admin user again with the same username and email, you can see it will not be allowed. Now let's log in with these credentials. Firstly, the user role credentials, followed by the admin role credentials. Both of these succeed and we get back a token. If we try and log in with the invalid credentials for admin user, we get back an invalid credentials response. Now we're going to test the protected root profile. This should work with both user role and admin role tokens. We're going to try the admin token first. And you can see you can access it. And then we're going to test it again with the user token. And you can see here that works as well. Now let's try the protected admin root. Let's first try and access it with the user role token. The response is access denied, you do not have the right permissions. If we run that again with the admin role token, we can access that route. Now let's test an invalid token. And we get back the message invalid or expired token, which is expected. Now we're going to test where a token is missing. And here we get back access denied, no token provided. As mentioned, I'm going to link all these curl commands in the description below the video so you can copy and paste these into your own terminals. And that's it. We've successfully implemented user authentication with JWT in our Node.js Express app, created routes for user registration and login, protected routes using JWT, and even added role-based authorization to control access. Now your app is secure and ready for users. In the next video, we'll dive into even more advanced topics like integrating databases and handling more complex authorization logic. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.